So I'm going to get started with kind of the housekeeping notes, and then we'll just go right into your presentation, Chris.
Sure.
So welcome everybody. Appreciate you being here. This is only our second Be Local Illinois event of 2020. It's been a rather odd year for all of us. I hope that everybody's hanging in there. We're really excited to have this event, host this event, and we've been working on it for a few months now. So I think this is going to be really, really great. Prior to getting started, I wanted to just share a couple things. We do have two upcoming events, and Adrian, if you don't mind, would you put the URLs for those in the chat if you get a chance? On October 30th, B Corp Curious Women is having a working group. They've got an event right for that, and we'll put the link to that in the chat. So if you are curious about working on the B Impact Assessment and want to have a working session and work with people who have gone through the whole process and everything, that's a great way to do that. And then on November 10th, we're starting a B Corp marketing series with Andy Crestodina from Orbit Media, talking about creating content that gets open, shared, etc. And so we'll have all of those things up on our website very soon, which is at illinoisbcorps.org. And support your local B Corps. We have all of our B Corps listed in there. We try to keep the listing as up to date as possible. So if you're looking for a company or you're looking for a product or service, that's a great place to go. And you want to buy local, that's a great place to go check it out. So, interactive session to work on your B Impact Assessment. You're probably seeing this in the chat from Adrian, and that's the Eventbrite there. And then the marketing series with Andy Crestodina. So, all right, now to the main event here. We are really excited to have Christopher Marquis, the author of Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. Chris is the Samuel C. Johnson Professor in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University. He researches and writes about how businesses are creating a more resilient and sustainable capitalism by focusing on the elusive triple bottom line of environmental, social, and financial performance. And I've been reading this book for the last month or so, and it's really good, and it's got a lot of really great stories and a lot of really good practical advice for operating in this manner as a business. So Chris, I'm going to let you go ahead, and I think you should just be able to share your screen, and it'll just kind of write over what I've got up there. If that doesn't work, I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, sure thing. It tells me I'm writing over yours. Great.
There you go.
Okay, can you see that? Super.
Yep.
Okay. Super. Well, thanks so much, Tim, and thank you, Adrian, both for really helping organize this. It's really wonderful to be with all of you. Of course, I wish I was with you in person. I went to college not that far from Chicago, so I have a lot of good memories of Chicago. And so hopefully someday I can come there and we can do something in person. So, as Tim mentioned, I've written this book, Better Business, How the B Corp Movement is Remaking Capitalism. Really stems from, over 10 years of passion and research of mine on this movement. I wrote, the first things I wrote about the B Corp B Lab were in 2010. I followed a bunch of B Corps over the years. And in the last few years, I said, I've done all this work. I should really just put it together into a book to hopefully play a role in popularizing the idea to broader audiences. So, I know that many of the people on the call are probably B Corps themselves and experts in this, and I hope that this is useful for you as well. There is a lot of stories, as Tim was mentioning, from all over the place, so hopefully you'll learn some. But it is, the book itself is positioned much more to a general interest audience. So if you're B Corps and you want to give it to your suppliers or your family members, even, it's that might be sort of appropriate audiences. The argument of the book, let me just give you sort of what I'm trying to do with the book in a nutshell before diving into the whole presentation. So, as many, if not all of you probably know, the last 50 or so years of the US economic system, capitalism, has really taken a dark turn in many ways, focused very much on shareholders only. In the past, companies were much more focused on broader sets of stakeholders, from great benefits for their employees, pensions, responsible community action, environmental action, to really focus very much on shareholders as the main objective, sort of, delivering profit for shareholders. And there's been a lot of talk about shifting this to a much more stakeholder-oriented model, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But what I think is, really compelling about the work that, B Lab and all the B corporations like yourselves are doing is that you've created a really robust system for companies to be more stakeholder-driven. Whether companies end up being a B Corp or not, I mean, they can use the B impact assessment. They can become benefit corporations. They can engage with the SDG Action Manager, which is a tool that helps integrate the SDGs, UN Sustainable Development Goals with sort of, on the ground measurement. I'll talk about all these different things. The focus of this talk, though, I will give you a sort of general overview of the book, but it will be more specifically focused on resiliency and how, I really see this model that has been created, again, from B Lab and B Corps on the ground. So it's sort of a top down and a bottom up type of thing, really creates a much more resilient economic model than what exists currently. So, okay. So, when I started writing the book and all the research I did was in a pre-COVID time. And throughout that time, there was increasing recognition that stakeholders really matter for firms. You probably are familiar with this Business Roundtable statement that came out and said, or statement of the purpose of the corporation. It's not just about shareholders, but it's about like a widespread set of not just about shareholders, but about stakeholders. So, companies exist not just to deliver profit, but actually meet the needs of employees, communities, consumers, et cetera. World Economic Forum as well. In January 2020, before we were all surprised with this COVID pandemic, the whole theme of the World Economic Forum was on stakeholders. I think the world, things have changed a lot. I mean, we've been hit with this global pandemic that has upended us economically, incredible, associated with, I don't know how closely associated with it, but sort of at the same time, the social disruption with Black Lives Matter and all of the, attention to systemic racism as a result of, the many, many public events that have been videoed by people of brutality and murder towards people of color that have caused tremendous sort of reaction and questioning of our system in a very fundamental systemic way. And through all of this, through both sort of the pandemic and then also broader speaking, the idea of changes in our system, people talk about this building back better, which I find very encouraging in some ways, because in many ways you could think about when there's economic disruption and other disruption, there's maybe an inclination to just do something that's easier, like, okay, let's just get things settled and not worry about all these problems, and then we'll maybe fix things later, which never really happens. So I see the movement of B corporations and the focus on building sustainable, resilient systems where sort of issues of justice and equity, diversity and inclusion matter fundamentally to be even more important post pandemic than ever. And I think that this idea of shifting from focus on shareholders to stakeholders, will take on even more attention. And I'll talk a little bit more about all those different points, but before I do, let me take a little step back and describe this idea of shareholder primacy. So this dates to an article in the New York Times Magazine by Milton Friedman. That's a photo of Milton Friedman right there, Nobel Prize winning economist. And he wrote an article that describes how the social responsibility of business is to increase profits. So all these things, everything from decreasing pollution to diversity initiatives, which he specifically, both those things he specifically mentions as not things a company should worry about, to things like pensions for employees. These are things that should be the focus government, just focus on profit. And that actually, if you look historically, that was very much a reaction to the discourse in the time. Actually, in the post-World War II era, companies were much more focused on their employees. Companies had very good pensions, or excuse me, employees had very good pensions. There's an article I read recently about Sears, a Chicago-based, company that I remember, well-known retailer when I was growing up. I think it's declined a bit in the ensuing years, but salespeople and various administrative staff would retire from Sears with the equivalent of like $1 million pension, because just that was the way that companies treated their employees in those days. Lots of work in communities. So this is what Bill Friedman was reacting against, and this, as you can imagine, idea really took off among corporate leaders, thinking like, okay, we have a rationale to cut costs and sort of focus on enriching our shareholders. So this sort of, unfortunately, in my opinion, has become much more than just an idea, but actually becoming coded in the laws that we have. So a number of the sort of cases that have been decided, particularly in Delaware, which is the home of U.S. corporate law, have really basically said that companies have fiduciary duty to their shareholders primarily, and other sort of unintended consequences that come up. You have mechanisms like stock options, which in theory sound good. I mean, all this stuff sounds good, like generally in theory, but when you tie executives' pay very closely to the share price, that means that they basically forget about everything else. And so many of these, in some ways, mechanisms that were created as a result of this shareholder primacy model, I think really sent us into a negative spiral of very short-term thinking and not really thinking about stakeholders. So, an argument in the book is that, this idea of shareholder primacy really is the root cause of many of our biggest social problems. Here's a graph, which I've seen similar graphs elsewhere. You might have as well. This idea of CEO to worker compensation ratio. So you look at Milton Friedman's time, 1970s, the CEOs made about 20 times more than the sort of average employees. I mean, that sounds pretty reasonable to me. But, as CEOs' pay got so closely tied to share price with options, and if they just could jack up the share price, they could just make more and more money. You can see how pay skyrockets to many years close to 400 to almost 400 to 1. I mean, it's just insane. And this is if you look at the top 1% earners in the U.S. through IRS filings, I mean, it's mostly corporate executives and finance people. And so I think that this idea of shifting to the shareholder primacy and these things like stock options, which really align executives to that, is a huge underlying cause of the massive income inequality we have. Pollution is another thing. There's this idea of externalities that exist where there's things like the air or the community environment, or even sort of things like benefits to employees, where companies are not for pollution, for instance, they're not really charged for them, but there is actually a real cost to them, to society. And maybe in the past, when they were not so closely focused on the shareholders, they would, maybe do responsible things and try to limit their pollution. But when the idea is just to basically meet the profit guidelines and increase the share price to increase the options, many of these costs get sort of placed back on on society. So I think that this idea of shareholder primacy is something that really needs to be re-examined, and I'm very glad that there's a lot of discussion, not just myself, around this, and hopefully B Corp and others will help transition us to a much more stable and resilient and sustainable economic model. So I think that, this idea of shareholder primacy has created a real fragile system. So, when you think about resilience, which is in some ways the, theme of this talk, fragility is the opposite of that. So, fragile systems are are ones that are, not resilient and more unstable. And, with this sole focus on shareholders, it means that this, sort of stakeholder position is, much more sort of weak and not as stable. And this is something that I think with COVID has just increased the vulnerability exponentially almost. So, you see supply chains of companies, everything from, like the well-known examples of this are sort of the fast fashion industry, where, they had all kinds of contracts with suppliers in, places like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and they just abandoned them. Many companies, B Corps, have gone about and done a lot of, I think, really progressive and good things. I'd interviewed the CEO of Danone, and he was talking about told me about all the work they did to really try to ensure that their, milk suppliers, because, a lot of time in the news, you would see a lot of sort of milk being dumped because if you can't actually put it to the next place in the supply chain, you're going to have, cows produce milk, every day. So you have to do something with it. And so, he told me about, actually, they felt a real responsibility to their contracts to their suppliers, and they were able to, creatively deal with things so that not to reduce the waste, although some was wasted, but then also make sure that people were paid for it. And obviously consumer demand has decreased, worker, productivity. Many workers obviously have been sort of laid off and are having issues getting back in the workforce. And so I guess, first of all, we have this system of shareholder primacy that places broader stakeholders like supply chain workers and even consumers in a vulnerable position. And this has only increased as the pandemic has unfolded. So this idea of resilience is a way, in some ways the opposite of fragility. And there's a lot of research that's been done on resilience that's been applied to business and how businesses can be more resilient. And this research has been mostly in the areas of, looking at things like nuclear reactors. I don't know if many of you grew up around Chicago, but I grew up in Pittsburgh, which it's in the same state. It's not that close to 3 Mile Island, but, I remember, this idea of like sort of nuclear reactor meltdown being something that from my childhood, being a really, big deal that, this, idea that these systems that are so complex and so tightly coupled, which is this other issue, can, if they're very fragile and not resilient, it could create big problems for a lot of people. So this research has looked at, these very high, these systems that require a lot of high reliability, like nuclear reactors, like, military, submarines, or like, space shuttles like the Challenger, there's been analyses of. And so what sort of factors can lead to, more resilience in a system, which then can sort of be applied and help business. So the factors that lead to fragility, which is again the opposite of resilience, is this tight coupling. So, things are, everything is so tightly aligned that if like one thing breaks, the whole system will break. And then also this idea of just an overall general complexity. The research that has been on this, here's just one example of this, a book just recently from 2 or 3 years ago called Meltdown: Why Our Systems Fail and What We Can Do About It. There's a number of recommendations, how to build a more resilient system, very much applied. These are, the business school professors that wrote this book. So ideas of structured decision tools, transparent systems, diverse teams, and learning from failure. And I don't know about you, but when I see this list, I see B corporations, basically. And if it's not exactly obvious to you, it will be as I go through the slides. But the just structured decision tools, I think the B impact assessment, even benefit corporation governance is part of that. Those are transparent systems as well. And the B corporation movement focus on diversity is a huge, sort of inspiring part of what B corporations do to me. So, I say this, B corporations, I see B corporations in this, and so it's not that surprising to me that prior analyses of B corporations' resilience during crises sort of show that they're more resilient. So, there was analysis done of B corporations surviving the 2008 recession, comparing them to similar firms that were not B Corps, found that they were 63% more likely to survive the recession, and then they end up growing much faster after that. And I think another paper shows they have a survival rate of close to 100% compared to 70% over a certain period of time on other small businesses. So what I'll say, next is about some of these different factors, like decision tools and transparency and diversity. But the outcome is here, that actually, going through all of this, the BIA, which I know is arduous and does actually have a benefit. So when you think about sort of the first two factors on the book's recommendation, sort of structured decision tools and transparency, again, this sort of really speaks to me of what you all, or many of you who are B Corps, have done through going through the B impact assessment and also the benefit corporation governance, which is about obviously embedding stakeholder ideas at the core of the firm and also being transparent on those. So you can see these two sort of axes, and I'll say a little bit more, and I think everyone might know a lot about them, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the B impact assessment being the core measurement tool that not just B corporations use, but hundreds of thousands or 100,000 plus companies around the world use. I was on a call giving another talk in Alberta, Canada, not that long ago, and someone from BDC was in this call. Business Development Bank of Canada said that they use the B impact assessment to assess their lendees. The number of venture capital companies I've talked to said they use it for their due diligence. So, this is something where, it's a robust measurement standard. And if you're a B corporation, you're transparent about it. So again, structured decision tools and transparency. As you know, these are a lot of the sort of well-known B Corps over here. I'm not sure I don't think there's any Chicago-based. I apologize. I should have put one.
We won't hold you to it.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. All right. So the B impact assessment, again, I think most of the people on the call are B Corps, so I won't go over this but I do for those of you who are not B Corps, or maybe you're interested in being a B Corp, a few seconds. So, this is a assessment of the company as a whole. You think about fair trade or organic. These are certifications of specific, processes or product types of, inputs to products. The B corporation is the only assessment of all, aspects of a company's operation, divided into governance, workers, customers, community, and environment. Companies that get 80 out of 200 to actually be qualified to be a B Corp. And that is actually, as I think all the people on the call know that are B Corps, that is actually very hard to get. That is not easy to get, and it's a great achievement for the companies that have done that. And it changes actually every 2 to 3 years. It used to be 2 years, now it's 3 years, and the assessment standards just end up getting harder every year, every 3 years, as B Lab gets a more refined understanding of actually how to measure and assess impact. Because the idea is to, have it as much focused on outcomes and most of the things like just policies, and they're a little more distal from the impact. So I think it's better for everyone for it to be more difficult, but it does become more challenging as time goes on. So the book that I wrote is called Better Business. And the reason why I titled the book Better Business, and this really speaks very closely to this idea of being more resilient, is that, I can't even tell you how many companies that I talk to, and you probably, this won't be surprising to you because many of you may think the same thing yourself, said to me, I got interested in this, I heard about this, I started this because I was really interested in the social and environmental aspects. But as it turns out, it just made the company a better business, that actually the ability to benchmark other companies, through the tool, learn about maybe things that the company wasn't doing that maybe they should be or other companies were doing, just really increased the sort of quality of management and systematization of the operations. Here's a couple quotes from my different interviews. This Luke Fletcher, who's a partner at a law firm in London, made lots of intangible things much more tangible. Tim Masson, who from Ian Martin Group, which is Toronto-based, consulting company, particularly IT, describes the BIA as an educational tool that is a good barometer or temperature gauge for purpose and impact. Rebecca McGee, who doesn't work there anymore, but when I was doing the book, interviewed her at Eileen Fisher, describes how it's about continuous improvement. So this is, going through this is a way to understand your company, tool for continuous improvement, and to compare and learn. So this is, again, sort of why I titled the book Better Business, because actually the BIA is an incredible tool to just make the company more resilient, more sustainable overall. And this is something that, if you think about it on a wider level, is not that surprising. Even these investors like Larry Fink, who you might be familiar with, he's the founder and CEO of BlackRock, which is, I think, the largest private investor in the world, has been writing these letters recently to shareholders and to CEOs of companies that he owns parts of, telling them to be more focused on purpose and sustainability and to track and measure. And the reason why he says is that because this is actually indicates better management quality, better risk management. So, actually focusing on all these ESG and stakeholder issues is about sort of building a business that lasts and is sustainable for the long term. One of the things, and this relates actually, leads well into this point I have right here. Many companies, one of the biggest challenges they have is, and B Corps and other companies that I've talked to, that, when you bring outside investors on, it creates issues with, people have different priorities as to maybe how much should be focused on mission, how much should be focused on investment return. And so, going through something like the BIA, provides a, obviously playbook for long-term risk management, continuous improvement, which is Larry Fink's point, but also it signals to other investors, what's important for the firm, and attracts the right investors so that companies can grow in a way where they're able to balance the mission, the different social and financial mission. It educates and aligns private equity interests in a way that, this is something that I've seen tremendously over the past, decade plus that I've been studying this, that companies have really educated the private equity and venture capital about the importance of this, such that, as I mentioned, many VC and PE firms use the tool to actually help them understand their portfolio companies. So it's something that's really useful. Over the past number of years, I don't know what I've seen this a number of places from B Lab, but I don't know which years it is over, but 150 VC venture investors invested over $2 billion in B Corps. This is something that when I first started studying this, the this will always be a movement of small companies, because investors will never want, particularly for the governance part, to give up, sort of have in some ways less control over the company, such that they maybe it'll lower the the valuation of the company if there's a stakeholder governance. But it's amazing how much impact investing has grown, and also the focus on this among the mainstream VC firms. Let me see where. Okay, yeah. So 1 second. I have another slide which isn't in this this deck. So if you look at the mainstream venture capital firms like Kleiner Perkins or Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia, all of these firms have invested in B corporations. So all major VC firms invest in B corporations nowadays, and even some mainstream VC firms have become B Corp. So one of the companies that I've talked to recently that I'm really really impressed with is a company called Fifth Wall. So they are a VC firm mainly focused on real estate and retail within real estate. And they, I think the founders are interested in ESG issues. They, care about helping their real estate portfolio become more environmentally sustainable, but they're not what you would traditionally consider an impact investor. And they invested in Allbirds and Cotopaxi and learned about the B Corp movement. And they actually end up becoming a B Corp themselves. And I interviewed the founders recently, and one of the founders, he said, yeah, it was really interesting to learn. It was something that was so consistent with our values. We were like, why wouldn't we become a B Corp? And so, I think that this has been a really big achievement of the movement to get these investors on board, private equity investors, venture investors. And I think it really speaks to the, again, sort of sustainability and resilience of the model. As you may know, another challenge is that, not just getting the venture investors on, but then actually getting public market investors also to be interested in, companies with social mission governance. And in this summer, there's been was a tremendous amount of activity around this. I think in sort of all the news of COVID, there, it sort of has been sort of not gotten as much attention as it should. I mean, I know I have a couple things. There was actually a piece in Fast Company recently where the journalist had interviewed me, and I was telling him about what I'm going to tell you in a second. It's like, wow, this is amazing. Can I talk to a company that has done this? And I introduced him to the CEO of Vital Farms. And then, there's an article on this, which we can circulate. But basically, so a couple things have happened this summer. One is, these two B Corps have gone public, which Lemonade is an online insurer went public on the New York Stock Exchange in July 2020, and Vital Farms, which make isn't the right word. They are an egg producer, sort of very sort of organic, free range egg, and also do some butter, I believe. And so, they went public also during this time period on NASDAQ. On top of that, actually, which I even think, I mean, having an IPO is sort of a big public event. But I mean, there's a lot of investors out there that can select into these different social mission companies. Or in various funds that sort of have a social mission focus. So I that's a big deal to me in somewhat, but a bigger deal actually is for a few companies, there were shareholder votes on changes in the articles of incorporation of the firm to take on shareholder focus. So both Danone, which is in France, and Amalgamated Bank, which is in New York, they changed sort of the operating articles of the company to say, we have a purpose beyond shareholders. We're, looking out for these various stakeholders, and both of these votes passed with over 99%. And so I think these two things, both this summer, point. I think that it really speaks well to actually public market acceptance of these type of benefit corporation structures, B Corp structures, social mission structures more generally. I mean, there were some early adopters and pioneers, which are sort of very special cases in a lot of ways. Laureate, just a little bit of background, you might be familiar with Laureate. They're a higher education company, but for-profit higher education company, and they wanted to go public as a B Corp because there was actually a lot of scandals in their industry. Trump University wasn't actually this early, but there were some other ones where there was some industry, higher education, for-profit higher education companies that had, been convicted of actually misrepresenting to the clients and customers, which were really students. So they really wanted to be go public as B Corp to sort of show that they were sort of in it for good. Natura, which is a longstanding B Corp, one of the largest B Corps, owns Avon, owns Body Shop, Silver Chef, which I actually don't know very well, but they're an Australian company, also public. So these are sort of the very early public companies as B Corps, a long time. They're really the only ones. But then I think this summer to 2020 has been an explosion in this model, which hopefully will only increase in the future. So when you think about this issues of sort of transparency and systematic processes, the benefit corporation statutes obviously are an important part of that too. So, this is something that is, I can see Illinois there. I don't know what, some of the states in Iowa maybe that is working on it. So Illinois is one of the ones. There's 36 plus DC is another one. Puerto Rico is another one. A number of countries around the world: Italy, Colombia, Ecuador, as well as British Columbia. So this idea of what benefit corporations statutes say, which again, sort of many of the B Corps on the call will be familiar with, but just in case there's people that aren't B Corps, these companies as B Corps, and this is as opposed to being a C Corp or an LLC or an S Corp, have to have an avowed purpose to create material positive impact in addition to profits. So I have to actually be accountable to a wide variety, the stakeholders, be it employees or the community, environment, and then be transparent about this. And this is one of the things that one of the reasons I think why I got so into studying B Corps, because I had studied a lot of companies' corporate social responsibility programs before that. There's this idea of greenwashing, and you're really not sure of, whether companies are actually, doing what they're saying. And there's a lot of obviously press accounts and scandals that I think really decrease the trust of companies in the U.S. And I think that this idea of transparency for B Corps, benefit corps is hugely an important aspect of the model, which makes it both, to me, very useful to consumers so they can know which companies are the real deal, but also holding companies accountable in a transparent way is something that leads them to be more resilient, as well as, this idea of transparency and structured rules being really essential to resilient organizations. Here's this chart. I mean, I can send you guys the PPT I'm having. You can circulate it to the folks that attended the meeting. I'll make sure to do that. You can look at this in your leisure if you're interested. But sometimes when I'm explaining this to people, it's a little confusing because B Corp, benefit corp, these are actually different things. I mean, one is a certification, one is a legal type of company, and there are similar ideas. So I think many people on the call probably know this very well, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. But again, sort of you think about one as a certification from an independent third party, and the other is a type of corporation. Yeah. and might very be obvious, but one of the things that when you think about combining the B impact assessment high score with the benefit corporation governance, it is a very they really work well together, because the B impact assessment and benefit B Corp process it holds companies to very high standards in the present day. And the benefit corporation legal framework, which gets embedded in the articles of the corporation of the company, is really what provides sort of the long-term sustainability of that. And so I think this quote from Jan Chouinard, the Patagonia founder, when California, where Patagonia is headquartered and incorporated, passed the benefit corporation statute, Patagonia was the first one to become a benefit corporation, first in line. He has this quote here, which describes that, so it enables mission-driven companies like Patagonia to stay mission-driven by institutionalizing the values, culture, processes, and high standards put in place by the founders. So, this is a way to sort of legally embed the mission of the company into the legal foundation of it, which then ensures for a long-term mission lock. Again, sort of very resilient. So going on, sort of off this sort of you have the accountability tools, you have the governance tools. Some of the things that I've found to be most important are how B Corps treat their employees and the benefit that has both to sort of the quality of life of the employees and the company, and then also which leads to the bottom line effects as well. So this idea of sort of cultural benefits, people ever ask me what the biggest economic benefit is, I say it's actually on the HR employee side, and they're going through the BIA and sort of establishing an effective culture creates, great retention benefits and also attraction benefits. So on the retention benefit side, you can see this quote here. Again, a second quote from Tim Masson, Ian Martin Group, where typically in the industries which is like IT, consulting, and you can see some employees here. A lot of employees are in India. Turnover is in the 40 to 50% range, and theirs is 10%. So high retention. Attraction is another important factor as well. So this again, I've been studying B Corps for many years, and something is surprising. So in some ways, I had a burst of activity from 2010 to 2015. So I published two HBS case studies on B Lab one in 2010, one in 2015, and a lot of other B Corps. I did 7 other B Corps. I did case studies on, published case studies, which I'm happy to send to anyone if you send me an email. And after that, I actually, it's when I moved from HBS to Cornell. I actually lived for a year in China, working some of my research there. So I sort of got away from sort of researching B Corps for a while. And then I came back to the US and sort of picked it back up and working on the book. And this is something that was even really shocking to me, from my focus from 2015 to really in 2017, 18, when I really started working in earnest on the book, is how many people actually are just really focused on working for B Corps. So companies like Athleta, I remember talking New Belgium Brewery, which is in Colorado, Cabot, which is in Vermont. All these companies and many other companies told me that, when potential applicants come to fill out the application form, and they're asked, as part of the form, why are you want to work at this company? And people say, because you're a B Corp. So I think that, the war for talent in getting the best employees is a real challenge, at all times. And I think that, this, B also attract some strong talent. And I also mentioned the employee retention part, which is just some more details on it from some other companies that I've spent a good amount of time with. Rhino, which is also Vermont, and then Boloco, which is New England, but more, New Hampshire and Boston, Massachusetts area. You know, these are companies that have really great employee benefits, pay their employees well, and have remarkable, you know, retention of their employees. You know, Rhino Foods, you know, any of you who are B Corps probably have heard there's been a lot of discussion in the B Corp community about the income advance program that they created. They then partnered with B Lab to create a foundation to diffuse this more broadly. And in the 10 years in which they implemented this, they found their retention rate increased by 36%. So really speaks to, you know, if you treat your employees well, it, you know, pays back to the business. If you don't even have sort of the appropriate sort of issue of justice reasons to do it. One of the other things that, you know, as I came back into studying B Corps from 2015 until 2017, 18, there was tremendously high impact to my learning, and I think to the B Corps as well, is the focus on diversity and inclusion. You know, now you think about sort of justice, diversity, equity, inclusion. You know, B Lab has this program, the Inclusive Economy Challenge, which I personally, I think is a great initiative, because in what it does, if some of you may have gone through this, you know, it aims to identify you know, different metrics in the sort of the broader speaking HR area around the JEDI issues that companies can work on and improve and report and communicate with others and work together. And I think this is so important because so many of the companies I talked to when they went through this, they said, you know, it's easy to think that you're actually doing well on things. But actually, when you get down and study it and look at the numbers and measure things inside your company, you find that there's actually a lot of inequities, you know, be it, you know, I mean, all probably started for very innocent reasons. You know, maybe, you know, for a variety of reasons, the women were not paid less when they got started. And then, you know, this amplifies over time. And there's these large, just gender as an example, you know, gender pay inequities, a number of the companies. And I really sort of respect and appreciate the fact that they were open about this, that, you know, when they went through this, they discovered that there were problems in their company, which they then sought out to address. And so, you know, when you know, people ask me, like, what is the one thing from your research that, you know, you can tell companies to do? And I tell them it's actually, you know, measure and track things, because, you know, so many of the companies, and these are, you know, not even in the, you know, JEDI area, but in the, you know, a company that will be really strong in environmental work will do the assessment and say, wow, we're really lagging in a variety of other areas. Or a company that has really great employment policies will realize they're lagging in the environment, et cetera. So I think that, you know, again, and it goes back to this theme of resilience, of, you know, using these structured decision tools and being transparent is so important and powerful, you know, not just to become a more stakeholder driven and socially responsible business, but also to be a better business overall. And, you know, if you don't buy the, you know, sort of justice and equity argument, I mean, there is research from economics, psychology, sociology, political science. I mean, the amount of research that shows actually having a more diverse team and company, actually they're more innovative because you have more different ideas, perform better across so many things. I mean, this is like so, you know, so well established in social sciences that, you know, even if the, you know, company doesn't think that it's important to do from a social justice standpoint, So, I mean, I think the people probably on this call, care more about the social justice, but I mean, it's good to know about the economic benefit too. Yeah, as I think all of you know, I just want to point out a bit, this, B Corp movement is a global movement, and, over half of B Corps now are outside the U.S. as opposed to inside the U.S. Here's some of my, some of my, I don't know if they're my favorites necessarily, but some of them I like. So the one in the upper left-hand corner, so I do a lot of research in China. And like I mentioned, from 2015, 2016, I lived in China for a year. I actually published a case study on this company upper left. It's called First Respond in English. They provide a variety of health and emergency services. In China, the sort of health and emergency infrastructure is not the same as it is in the US or other more developed countries. And so it's a really important social value to actually provide things like AEDs or emergency services during athletic events. And that's their example. The company I talked to recently, which I was really, shocked about, you can see the company on the right-hand side with the red, Tony's Chocolonely, which I was really attracted to the name, but then sort of learning about and interviewing people at the company. It's a chocolate company. From the name, you probably could figure that out, but they're really very active in trying to create transparent supply chains whereby sort of slavery and child labor is abolished. I mean, and I was shocked to learn that actually, it's child labor, I'm not surprised, but actually slavery still exists in our world. And so Tony's Chocolonely has that noble mission and is working through a creative business model to try to address it. So Body Shop, well known, Natura. Roshan, which some of you might know, it frequently gets brought up at B Corp events, largest telecommunication provider. I think the largest employer in Afghanistan is a B Corp. It's actually, I think, the only B Corp in Afghanistan, which is BDC, which is in Canada, which I mentioned. Some other very interesting ones. Another sort of part of this movement that I wanted to address, which you might be familiar with, but it's more sort of on the cutting edge, is this B Movement Builders Program. So for a long time, when I taught on B Corps in my classes, no one would think there could ever be large B Corps. It was something, it would be small companies, medium-sized companies, even, sort of the B Corp poster childs like Patagonia, 7th Generation, Ben & Jerry's. They might be hundreds of millions, $1 billion or $2 billion, which, to me sounds like a big company, but nowadays you have these multinational companies that are tens of billions of dollars in sales, and the complexity of these companies that exist over 50 countries, scores of legal subsidiaries. It's just sort of mind-boggling how these companies could be certified, because one of the things that I've been so impressed with the B Lab folks is really the commitment to keeping the standards rigorous and not saying, okay, if we can get some big name, maybe we'll lower things. No, I mean, it's actually, for these large companies, maybe it's even more difficult. So what they've done is created this B Movement Builders Program, which I think about as, in some ways, a less steep on-ramp into the B Corp movement. So there's a variety of things that these companies have to do, from, start assessing using the B Impact Assessment, maybe some subsidiaries, maybe some parts of their business, sign on to the Declaration of Interdependence, which is the core, statement of B Corp values, work together, particularly on sustainable development goal ideas, commit to sustainable development goals. And this was just announced in August. And there are 6 companies that have originally signed up for this. So, on the right-hand side, you have Natura and Danone, which are very deeply involved in the B Corp movement already. Natura is a B Corp itself. Danone has 27, as of recently, 27 B Corp subsidiaries. 45% of their overall revenue is a B Corp. Of B Corps, they are committed to becoming a B Corp by the global organization, which is 2025. Joining them, in some ways, those two organizations, the mentors, are this Magalu, which is a Brazilian retailer, a multinational big company, Godovian, which is one of the biggest fragrance companies in the world, based out of Switzerland, Gerdau, which is a steel maker in Brazil, also multinational, and Bondaloo, which is a French-based sort of vegetable grower and distributor. And one of the things that stuck out to me when I sort of learned about this is that there's no American companies. These are European and South American companies. And it really begs the question, I think that the B Corp movement is, even though over 50% are outside the US, has done really well with US companies, with entrepreneurs, with, amazing social entrepreneurs like many of the folks on the call today. But if the movement, and I don't think it's an if, I think as the movement shifts to larger multinationals, like these companies, the center of gravity, I think, of the movement may be shifting as well outside the United States, because maybe the US with its, even though moving to stakeholder focus, still, Wall Street is so dominant, short-term focus is hugely important. So anyway, so just sort of an interesting sort of observation, food for thought to think about as large companies come on to the B Corp movement, where are they going to be from? Okay. Subsidiaries, I've sort of lived about this. Danone, that's an older picture, but it's in sort of a nice picture, so I keep it. A few of the ones, now 27 of the Danone subsidiaries are B Corps. Unilever has a lot of famous B Corps, 7th generation, Ben and Jerry's. Some ones along the bottom from, Fetzer, which is owned, it's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I think, Oregon. I don't think it's a California one. I think it's Oregon. Is owned by Conchi Toro. Four Pines Brewery, which I think is Australian. The one's really surprising me, Overdrive. I do some commuting in my driving to I live in New York City, but Cornell's main campus is in Ithaca, and I teach a lot in New York City, but I do have to drive to Ithaca some, so I frequently listen to books on tape. I get them from the New York Public Library, listen to them on Overdrive, this software that you can sort of rent, or not rent, you can borrow books from your library and use audiobooks. And I was so surprised when I realized they were B Corp just recently. I've been using this product for a long time. They're owned by Rakuten, which is the Japanese company that owns like buy.com, which for a long time was a well-known brand. Athleta, owned by Gap. So I talked a little about the SDGs, and I want to say, sort of, we're getting close to the end. That another really promising thing I think is that that B Lab is partnered with the UN Global Compact to develop this SDG Action Manager, which I think is hugely important, because it's these goals that sort of all of humanity are focusing on under the guidance of the UN, 17 goals, from poverty alleviation to all kinds of institutions, gender equity, a lot of things that are really deep, ideas that are really deeply embedded with the B Corp movement too. But the SDGs are not necessarily operationalized in a way that they make sense and can be done by business very easily. And so I think having sort of connecting the B impact assessment with the SDGs, and then where there were gaps, filling in with new sort of questions, idea, is hugely big contribution. So I think that's to the global achievement of sustainable development overall. And the final thing I'm going to close with is this idea of consumers. And we've talked sort of a lot about employees, about investors, communities a little bit, and in some ways, a challenging stakeholder to meet the needs of, really make a very resilient system are consumers. And this is actually the number 12 Sustainable Development Goal, to really promote responsible consumption and production. This is obviously something the B Corps have been doing. You know, Patagonia has sort of, in other companies like Eileen Fisher is another example, you know, focus on having consumers not just buy new products all the time, but actually, you know, repair and reuse products. And I think that, you know, the B Corp logo is a really useful tool for companies to see which sort of is a real deal. Yeah, and so you can see here, this is a market research survey done in the US that, you know, 61% of companies think that, you know, they say they want to buy from socially responsible firms, but they don't know actually how to find those companies. And this is, I think, where the B logo comes in, where being a B Corp, it helps consumers understand that you're the real deal. Millennials are tremendously focused on, you know, aligning their workplace, their purchases with their values. And so this is, I think, the frontier. I think, you know, for a long time, I don't think people knew the B Corp logo as much, but as these large multinationals like Danone come on, and, you know, the B logo is now on, you know, tens of millions of, you know, of yogurt canisters, silk soy milk, you know, or you know, Horizon organic milk that is in everyone's refrigerators. I think that this, you know, the consumer awareness will only increase. So the final thing I want to say, and this won't be a surprise to those of you in the B Corp movement, you know, that already, but, you know, we all as consumers can help guide the choices of companies to be more sustainable and more resilient and more equitable. And 2 years ago in the 2018 election, B Lab came out with this Vote Every Day campaign, where they highlighted the fact that consumers can, you know, not just in 2018, you know, cast their ballot for candidates, but actually when they're buying their IPA, you know, from maybe New Belgium Brewery, or their socks from Bombas, or their soap from, you know, it could be, you know, Seventh Generation or Grove Collaborative, or lots of B Corp style that actually, you know, the furthest left picture is, you know, it's not a cash register, but it's a ballot box. And I think that, you know, all of us, as we think about the purchases we make, I think it's really important to think about how we can actually make the world a better place and support companies that are doing well in the world. So with that, I will stop. Probably went over time, so apologies to all of you. And I'm really looking forward to our questions and discussion.
Cool, and thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate that. We do have some questions. So I'm going to start with JD's question at the top. Are you seeing any large US companies reform executive compensations away from stock options, which often incentivize short-term thinking, and towards a compensation scheme that incentivizes long-term value creation?
You know, I have not seen, this is on, I can't say this is something that I watch like in super detail, but I mean, I read the papers every day, and I have not seen this. I think, you know, this stock option payment, I think, is such the root of many problems that we have in our corporate system. There's a really interesting documentary I saw, I think it was on Netflix, called Fishing with Dynamite. I don't know if any of you have seen this. It's actually about the transition to stakeholder management. And there's this guy in there named Michael Jensen, who you know, so Milton Friedman usually gets credited with some ways with this stakeholder primacy idea. But this guy, Michael Jensen, is the person that really brought this into reality, because he is the person who really advocated for companies to align the CEO's pay with stock price. And he admits on this documentary, he said, you know, I was wrong. You know, this was the wrong thing to do, and it had all kinds of, you know, bad effects. But, you know, the problem is that it's a machine. You know, you have I mean, the CEOs, they feel like they've been working hard their whole time to, to really make their money. There's all these compensation consultants that, do all these studies for boards, which show, where their CEO falls as far as within the 50th or 75th percentile. So it's something that is very hard to change. And I'm not sure how to do it, but anyways, I think it's a huge root cause for a lot of the problems we have in transitioning to a more stakeholder-driven system.
Great. All right. Next question. We know that too often business lobbyists have been forces for pollution and inequality. What is the intersection between B Corps and public policy and advocacy?
Yeah,
I think that's a really good and timely question.
Totally, and I think so. I think you're totally right. I mean, so your question highlighted more the negative aspects, or at least what I sort of see the negative aspects. Probably maybe you do too. I'm going to talk about the positive aspects, and I think that again, sort of I reflect on many things that I have learned going through this this research. So many B Corps take stands on really important issues and really try to actually, the vast majority of companies, they want to sell their products and services to the world and make great products and services. But, many times the B Corps, they actually take on social issues that they want to actually help solve through, and the way to solve them is through advocacy channels. So, through the, Summers and the, detention on systemic racism and white supremacy, Ben and Jerry's is a famous example that came out and advocated for that. But there's a lot of other, Patagonia is another famous one around a variety of, the environmental, sort of declassifying the national monuments and trying to work on that. Beauty Counter is a company that I recently interviewed some of the leaders of, and they're very active on ingredient regulation. The stuff that is in cosmetics that both may be detrimental to people's health, but then also the supply chain of it actually has a lot of really problems with, like, who they're hiring. Could be a lot of sort of children. It could be very bad working conditions. So I think that when I think about advocacy, I think I'm thinking about it more on the positive side, where there's a lot of companies that are trying to actually hold companies accountable. Now this is Sarah's question. I'm scrolling through here now. Yeah. So I think it's hugely important. So advocacy. So I think all companies, all B Corps should be advocates to try to make their industry and other companies in their industry better.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Charlotte Green wants to know, if you had a magic wand, what would be your wish for the future of the B Corp movement? I love that question.
I had a magic wand. Wow, that is a challenging one. I think so. It goes a little bit beyond just the movement, but I think that, well, I'll say two things. And they go a little bit beyond movement. So I think that if there could be national benefit corporation legislation passed, which Elizabeth Warren had put forward, and I think it's not dead yet. I think so. I think just symbolically that the attention that brings to things, and it doesn't apply to actually that many companies, only very, very large companies, I think would hold companies beyond B Corps accountable in ways that they had not been before, which may break some of these sort of like systemic institutions that exist, like, stock options or whatever. So I think that having some legal intervention might help. I think also, ways to get more large companies on board is another. That's a more vague wish, but that's another one.
Okay, Matt Bloom, thanks for this question. I think most of us on this call decided to become B Corps because of our values. However, as you pointed out in your presentation, there are tangible, measurable economic benefits to the B Corp model, especially when it comes to resiliency. These benefits seem obvious, but how do we communicate the economic benefits of the B Corp model to those companies who do not share our values? Is it marketing? Is it more better data? Is it a policy question? That's a good multi-layered question there.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to make sure who is this one? Tim, let me.
Matthew Bloom. He's one of our B local leaders.
Okay, thank you. Is it on the comments or the questions?
It's in the Q&A panel. I've been reading from the Q&A panel.
Okay, I see that. Yeah, so yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that in some ways there are like the companies that could potentially be B Corps. I think so implicit in your question, I think Matthew is that maybe companies can be sort of convinced that this is a really good way to do things through an economic rationale, and then maybe can sort of change their behaviors, which I agree with. But I think it's hard to think about how to do that, because I'm actually writing up an article about sort of the success of B Corps in conservative communities, so politically conservative communities. So interviewing, the leaders of one of the B Corp in Oklahoma and in Tennessee and in Florida, and to try to understand how they're able to actually convince companies to be, B Corps, and why they're B Corps themselves. And I think it's in some ways ends up being common ground almost that they end up or able to establish with these companies. So that might be better data. So if it's suppliers of your company, maybe there's ways that you can, connect into the common overlap that you have. Some of the companies that talk to me in the conservative realm that actually that the B Corp ideas are consistent with a lot of faith-based rationales, which many of the companies may follow that are not B Corps, or sort of believe in, the leaders may believe in, and that's a way sort of into it, which I guess sort of sounds a little bit like marketing, although it's more, I see it more as sort of, establishing a common ground. So for me, when I usually will lead when people ask me about it with the employee benefits, and then talk about sort of the systemization of management, and draw on Larry Fink is what I, sort of talk to people that aren't B Corps why it's sort of an important thing, if you just want an economic rationale. But it's, the benefits seem obvious to me too. So it does make it more of a challenge when people are not as bought into it.
Yeah. Emily asked, do B Corps have youth advocates or other programs to mentor or partner with groups at community colleges or public universities? You're probably well equipped to answer that one.
Yeah. So, that's an interesting question. So as far as I know, there's not like a firm outreach where there's like a B Corp set of folks that organize from more of a top-down fashion, but there is, I think, a tremendous grassroots network of, some of it's through net impact, the sort of environmental sustainability, social responsibility student club, which there's like 400 chapters around the world. So many universities have, different classes and professors that focus, have workshops where companies can come and the students help them go through the B impact assessment. So I don't know of any sort of like formal organization around it, but there is tremendous activity on college campuses, which is what I'm most familiar with, around of students that are passionate about this and working themselves through these, class-led consulting projects to help companies, become B Corp. So There's an organization called B Academics, which is affiliated with B Lab, that is, I think, a couple thousand professors around the world, a lot in South America. One of the sort of cores of it was through Sistema Bay, but also through America, through the US. Actually, North Carolina State University is a professor named Jessica Thomas, who has done amazing things setting this up. And she, if at North Carolina State University, their B Corp clinic, this is available on the web. Lots of great stuff that they're doing. But many of the places that I've been visited have told me about how they learned about B Corp ideas through a student project, or someone came work for them that are working with this. So I think there are a lot of this, but it's not very organized. It seems very grassroots to me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's about it for our question
Great.
list. Really appreciate all of your time and all of your pearls of wisdom, and sharing all of this really great information with us. We will send out a recording of this conversation for anybody who signed up and missed it. If we'll send a link to purchase the book, Better Business. And if anybody has any additional questions, we can make sure that we get those funneled over to Chris as well. Chris, thanks so much again, and
Yeah.
really appreciate you doing this, and best of luck with your book.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Tim, for inviting me, Adrian, also for your help, and everyone for coming and your questions. And as I hope you can tell, it's something I'm very passionate about and really sort of believe in the movement. So it was great to be able to share it with you and hear some of your questions and thoughts. So thank you very much.
I definitely agree, for sure. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.